morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by ServPro. And we are all about this here this week. Horns down in D. We're going to challenge some of you as it relates to that here coming up in just a little bit, because there is absolutely a gut check in store for Georgia fans, the Georgia team, as it goes to Texas on Saturday. And I think all of us, we got to do our part to make sure that we're contributing to a positive vibe and a positive energy as Georgia gets all of that done. So with that in mind, on today's show, a couple of things that we're going to talk about. There is probably more doubt about Georgia right now from national media types. We'll hear from one of those in a moment. Some cases, UGA fans. We talked about that yesterday. There's probably more doubt about Georgia right now than we have seen at any point in time since prior to Georgia winning a couple of national championships in 2021 and 2022. And some of that doubt is obviously not unwarranted, to use, I guess, what is a double negative. Some of that doubt is totally justified. And yet, for people who seem to already want to be tapping out on Georgia, on the season, on their chances of beating Texas, on their chances of winning another national championship, a lot of that to us still feels like too much too soon, based on what the Dogs still have a chance to accomplish. So we're going to talk about that here today. We'll tell you what's being said. We'll tell you why we think, in some cases, it's overstated, and we'll talk about the path to victory there for UGA. To help us out with that today, Jake Fromm, the former Georgia quarterback, he is going to be on hand for today's show. Can't wait to have him. Very special moment to have him live on the program. That's always a lot of fun. And Connor Riley, who is covering all the action from Athens, he joins us today, too. So all of it is coming up. We're glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. It begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by ServPro. Cleaning, restoration, construction.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There is clearly a mood in the air right now around Dog Nation. It is not necessarily all that positive. A lot of folks have what seem to be some very serious questions about Georgia ahead of the game against Texas there on Saturday. And I think that you know me well enough, if you've been with us for a while, to know that based on the conversations we ourselves have been having, we don't think these questions are necessarily unwarranted. There is room for skepticism and even maybe doubt about how Georgia is playing right now compared to the expectation to begin the season, where Georgia was the preseason number one. Thus far this year, Georgia really hasn't looked a lot yet like a number one type team. What our typical expectation for Georgia as a number one team, or a college football team at large kind of as a number one team, Georgia hasn't quite looked like that as of yet. Now, here is what we don't know. What we don't know is if this is because Georgia has regressed, there's a chance that's true, or if Georgia's seeming dip is about a larger story in the sport overall, where, as Kirby Smart has warned over and over again, the talent levels, the overall depth program to program is not what it once was. Your backups are now getting an NIL deal to start for some other program, perhaps, and all of a sudden you're not quite leaning on the same roster strength you once would have had. So we don't quite yet know if the reduced performance from Georgia is about an individual regression with this program we all care about, or if it's the sign of a larger transformation for college football, where what we define as excellent or perhaps elite in a given year is not quite as dominant as it once was. We're about to find out in the weeks to come. And for Georgia, one of those big tests is on tap for Saturday as it gets ready to play against Texas. And if you are one of those fans that sort of lives online here a little bit, I don't think that you need for me to tell you there are a lot of people that are just not quite so sure that Georgia is going to be able to and be capable of winning this game on Saturday. That Georgia has already shown so many flaws and so many blemishes that it's just a futile hope that Georgia could travel to Texas as an underdog against the number one team in the country and win this game. Not this year, some fans are saying. And perhaps not this year, some media types are saying there as well. I couldn't help but notice that perhaps the most prominent voice, whether you like him or not, whether you trust his knowledge or not, I don't think there's any denying the most prominent voice down here in the south part of the country when it comes to college football is that of Paul Finebaum. And Finebaum recently made an appearance. You guys know who Matt Berry is? Berry is one of the, frankly, few, strangely enough, college football-minded personalities on ESPN that does a sports center, kind of does some of the show hosting stuff. Most of those folks just don't seem to be all that interested in college football, despite the huge amount of revenue that college football brings to ESPN. Different topic for a different day. Matt Berry, though, is one of the guys that seems to enjoy the sport and seems to genuinely know a little bit about it. You think they ought to have more of those type guys working at ESPN, but one way or another, they sort of don't. Either way, though, Berry likes college football, has his own podcast where he talks about college football. Paul Finebaum, a guest on that show. And Finebaum really kind of went in a little bit hard on what Georgia looks like right now, what it feels like as a team right now. All of this, a very dire description ahead of the game against Texas on Saturday. Listen to Finebaum and see if you agree with his assessment of where things stand for Georgia here right now.
Texas right now, Paul, they're the class of the SEC in their first year.
There's no debate. Georgia just they're a hard team to watch. I have a lot of confidence in Kirby Smart in getting things that maybe other coaches can't, but I don't know. I'm not sure I don't think he has that much talent on this team in terms of just breakaway game talent that can compete with Texas right now. I mean that was a slugfest against Mississippi State. I realize somewhat of a sandwich game, but last week was ugly.
So last week was ugly. Georgia's a hard team to watch. Georgia's in a slugfest with Mississippi State, and essentially would go on. We don't have time to play all of this. If you want to check it out, we'll give you a link to the Matt Berry show so you can. That Georgia's kind of got its back against the wall playing at Texas on Saturday. And listen, obviously I'm a pro-Georgia guy. I made no secret about it. I don't necessarily love Paul Finebaum, to be completely honest with you. So it'd be really fun to come on here and be like, this is the guy that's ripping your team coming into this big game on Saturday. This guy doesn't think you have a chance. We've done that sort of thing before. It's been really fun. But in this particular case, if we're being honest, there are a decent number of Georgia fans. James Hightower, I happen to have the Facebook comments section open in front of me here right now. I don't typically keep comments open while I'm talking because I get distracted. But James Hightower writes in to say, you're right, B.A. I see a lot of disgruntled bandwagon fans here right now. Well, whether they be bandwagon fans or not, there is a significant number of disgruntled Georgia fans here at the moment. And some of those disgruntled Georgia fans, whether it be because of defensive breakdowns or, the continual narrative about Mike Bobo, fair or not, there is a lot of disgruntled fans around Dog Nation here at the moment. A lot of Georgia fans might actually agree with some of what Paul Finebaum said right there. So the question you kind of lead into in all this is, what do you do about that? Are people just right? I mean, if we're being honest, we say this about certain teams sometimes. We said this about Missouri the other day, that Missouri's shown you nothing. So when Missouri plays a game like Texas A&M, we correctly describe what was going to happen there. That Missouri has played so bad week to week, there's no way they can go on the road and win this game. And they didn't. So if we can see this coming for certain type of teams, then should we all just admit right now we see this coming for Georgia as well? Or at least some people would say they see this coming for Georgia as well. That there is evidence built up over the course of the previous few weeks that just suggests Georgia's not going to be able to get it done this year in this game. The schedule's too tough. The talent level for Georgia, for whatever reason, has regressed too much, and it's just not going to happen. Well, you're perhaps not surprised to find out my response back to all of that is, it's not time to say that yet. Even if I can't guarantee a win against Texas, and I cannot, and even if myself I have seen some issues as it relates to Georgia, and we've talked about them openly in the show, we're not scared to have those conversations. Of course, anyone would notice that there as well. that Georgia, based on what it's done in recent years, including for most of the 2023 season, even though it ended without Georgia getting to the college football playoff, based on what Georgia has done in recent years, that Georgia, I think, has earned a level of trust, even in the face of some obvious blemishes. I think that Georgia has earned the freedom for us to believe they can find a way to figure it out. And even against what right now looks to be a very tough opponent, week to week, even against a soft schedule, if you want to say it that way, the most consistent team in America thus far this year has probably been Texas. So Georgia's in a road spot against a team that's favored against them, ranked number 1. But I haven't completely given up on my trust in Georgia yet, even as I acknowledge they're going to have to play far better to beat Texas than they have for any time thus far this season. And certainly for a complete game, have to be way better than they've been in the past. Now, let me try to kind of spin this in a positive direction here for a moment. The thing that I think that you should probably take some comfort in if you're a Georgia fan going into this game on Saturday is the fact that it sounds to me that the conversation in the building in Athens, the football facility, sounds very similar to the kind of conversation that we're having right now and that you are having with your friends who are Georgia fans around the tailgate table, on social media, in your message board chats or whatever else. It sort of sounds like the conversation happening in the building in Athens reflects that pretty closely. And sometimes maybe it doesn't. Sometimes the multi-million-dollar football coach, maybe he lives in the ivory tower and he's so insulated from the criticism that he doesn't know what the average fan is sort of thinking, or he doesn't really know what the average fan is sort of saying. It's at least possible for that to be the case sometimes with a football program. You kind of get the sort of elitist mindset of, well, none of these people understand anything about what it's like to be me, so therefore, my viewpoint doesn't reflect them at all. But if you listen to Kirby Smart yesterday, and I would invite you to, on the DawgNation YouTube page, you can see the full, the full press conference from yesterday. When Kirby Smart was kind of asked what he wanted from the game on Saturday, I think Smart sounded a lot like the average Georgia fan in terms of what he wants to see from a team that he knows has capability. What he wants to see, it sounds like what a lot of you want to see there as well. This is what Kirby Smart said.
I want to see them play their best game against Texas. Simply stated, we have not played our best game. We have not put a complete game together, and that's what every coach's goal is, right? To play your best game moving forward, and that's what's going to be needed to go on the road at Texas and play. We got to play better, and that's the only goal I'm thinking about right now is how we play this week.
Doesn't that sound like you? Doesn't that sound like me? Kirby Smart says, man, I want to see us play better. I want to see this team that I believe in put a full game together. Now, just wanting to doesn't equal achieving. We understand that. We all want things in life. Not all of us get what we want. But the question is, do you trust that guy to get that done? Or have you just given up on that because you're mad about Mike Bobo or you're, disgusted by what you see with the Georgia defense? Have you given up on your trust in that guy? And ultimately, this is what all sports talk kind of comes down to. Sort of a prediction about what's about to happen. And obviously, none of us can know for sure. But my prediction is a Georgia win on Saturday. I'm not tapping out, and I'm not giving up. And for a lot of people who think that maybe a show like this isn't skeptical enough, then you may get your chance to laugh at me. You may. But we're also going to reserve the right to kind of laugh back at some of you. We did some of this yesterday where we kind of brought back up years ago what naysayers were saying then as proof that naysayers aren't evidence of failure, because Georgia seems to always have naysayers even before some of the biggest moments for the program. That's just sort of the way that it works out. So if you want to laugh at me if I'm wrong after this game and say I knew all along that Georgia didn't have it this year, you'll be fair to do that, and perhaps you're even right to do that. We're going to reserve the right to do some of that same stuff back ourselves here based on how this plays out on Saturday. I said yesterday, I only see one path to victory for Georgia. that Georgia now just sort of looks like much of the rest of college football. It is not in a category by itself the way that it's been in the past. Georgia used to be able to absolutely smother its opponents and dominate them defensively. Clearly right now, Georgia's not doing that, not even to a team like Mississippi State. Paul Finebaum is correct in pointing that out. But in the kind of game that feels more like the rest of the college football games we watch on a weekly basis, do we think that Georgia can win one of those type of games? I do. A shootout where it's 41-38 or 37-31 or 38-34 or something in keeping with that, both teams getting at least 30, Georgia needing at least 30, if not 40 to win. I think Georgia can win one of those type of games. It's my prediction that they will, not because I know for sure. I have some skepticism and doubt about this team, much the same way that all of you do. But I'm also wise enough to know that my doubts aren't always true, and my skepticism isn't always correct. That Georgia has confounded, I guess, the perceived expectations for it before. People were questioning it after it lost to Alabama, the 2021 SEC championship. They were questioning it before it played Tennessee in 2022. You can perhaps cite your own examples of that. In other words, it is way too soon to give up on Georgia. Maybe on Saturday, hostile environment in Austin against a Longhorns team that is legitimately very good. Maybe Georgia also reminds us there of just how good it can still be as well. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented today by ServPro, and we're glad you are with us. No matter how you get to us, video, 10 a.m., radio, Athens Sports Radio 96 The Ref, podcast, Apple, Spotify, everything else. Let me also say this there, too. Very, very quick on this. I just want to make sure I say this. Did not mention this yesterday. I had so much going on, I forgot to. So I put out on X on Friday that we were having an issue with the podcast. It's a long story. It was not serving to Spotify correctly, and I think there was also a couple of issues on Apple as well, but it wasn't serving on Spotify correctly. And the best that I can tell, some of you have been kind enough to reach out about that, and I really appreciate it. It seems like that's been corrected. I wish I could tell you that technology always functions exactly as it's supposed to. Obviously, it doesn't. The good news is I've got people a lot smarter than me that help me with stuff like that, and I'm telling you, I'm just so impressed by the team we have in place right now. DawgNation has never been better served than it is right now by the people behind the scenes kind of making all this hum successfully, and I'm so thankful for that. I really am. If this was up to me, I'd just be on the sidewalk shouting into a megaphone. That's all I'd be able to do, but I got folks who help us get this on the air. So they worked quickly. It seems like we've gotten it fixed. I always appreciate your feedback. You don't like something about the show, it's not working correctly, you don't like something about me, your feedback's always welcome as far as I'm concerned. So y'all let us know there was a problem. We try to get it fixed. The best that I can tell it is. Check it out, especially on podcast. That's always the one that's, frankly, just a little bit more finicky than the other platforms because it's our oldest platform. So y'all check it out. Make sure it's good, but I believe it probably should be. Let me also give a shout-out to our friends at ServPro for making this all possible today. When it comes to messy cleanups, ServPro are the experts when it comes to that. I'm talking about their restoration specialists. You got fire damage, water intrusion. A lot of stuff can happen to your property, whether it's the home you live in, perhaps you've got some rental property. You depend on that for passive income, important part of your investment portfolio perhaps, or your livelihood. Your business is housed in a piece of commercial property. All of this really susceptible to damage, fire, water, all kinds of crazy stuff like that. Storm damage, obviously, we're looking at that here right now. Well, if something like that happens, you want it put back together like it never even happened. That's what the restoration specialists at ServPro are all about. So make sure you find them online. It's servpro.com, S-E-R-V, servpro.com. Each franchise, independently owned and operated. They will do great work for you. They've done it for us, literally at our old studio at DawgNation. They did this for us when we had it was like a coffee machine that served by like a water pipe broke. Water went everywhere. I mean, this is not a made-up story. This is a real thing. I don't lie. Made up. This is crazy. Water everywhere, damaged the walls, damaged the floors. ServPro came in, they cleaned it all up, and it was all put back together like it never even happened. That's what ServPro is all about. You can find them online at servpro.com. This is a busy show. It is Jake Fromm before we're done today. And it's Connor Riley here coming up in just a moment. I'll also give you an update on DawgNation Invasion here in a minute there as well. We need you. And speaking of needing you, I want to ask you a favor by the time our show is done. And a lot of what we just said, the vibe around here is not great right now. I'm not scared about that because, honestly, this is just what college football is. It is very intense. There's always a lot of edginess. People are not in great. We love the sport, but it puts us in a bad mood sometimes, and that's just where things are here right now, which is totally fine with me. But I'm going to try to do something later on in the show to kind of change the temperature on some of this if you're willing to help. And so we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. Prior to that, though, let's go around the doghouse. And let me do two things here real quick. One of these is sort of quick, and then I want to get into the topic that I want to get into mainly for Doghouse here. Let me just briefly mention something that happened yesterday. Kirby Smart did respond again to the, not quite an allegation, it's been obviously proven with video. There was a shove involving him and the Mississippi State quarterback on Saturday. Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, says that there should have been a penalty there for that. Smart said he reached out to Jeff Lebby, reached out to Van Buren, and it seems like all is fine with this. I mean, clearly it would have been better if this had not happened. I don't deny that. But I just don't make a big deal about this. I don't. I don't think it would have been a big deal if Jeff Lebby had shoved Carson Beck. I mean, look, if Sarkisian had pushed a guy on the Oklahoma sideline, would we have tried to kind of make a thing about that? Maybe we would have, because we're obviously an entertainment-focused show. I'm not unself-aware here. But ultimately, here is, I think, an important thing to understand about football, is that the people inside the sport just don't get their feelings hurt very easily. Van Buren's a tough dude. A little unintentional contact with the Georgia coach. He didn't go home and cry about that. He just didn't. A lot of what ends up being controversial in football sometimes is people outside the bubble of football being aggrieved on behalf of somebody else. But honestly, there's just not a bunch of grievances inside a football locker room, on a football field, with players and coaches. You got to be a tough dude to play football. Obviously physically tough, but there's also a certain level of mental toughness required there as well. So if you get your feelings hurt easily, football's just not for you. It's not. There's a lot of sports where there's constantly, people being upset and get their feelings hurt, and there's soap opera style drama, and you can watch all that all day long on ESPN. But football is just not a sport where that kind of stuff happens very much, at least at the college level. It's just not. So there was a shove, probably shouldn't have happened. If Kirby Smart had to do it all over again, I'm guessing he probably tries to go out of his way to make sure that doesn't occur, even if it was just sort of a accidental type thing. Still would have been best to probably avoid that. And yet at the same time, no one got their feelings hurt. Doesn't linger, I don't think. It's not that big of a deal to me, because it doesn't appear to be that big of a deal to the guy who was involved in it, the quarterback from Mississippi State. And from that standpoint, I think that's about all I probably need to say about that. On the other side of things, though, let me focus in on what I wanted to really talk about here, which is, despite an overwhelming amount of evidence, I think that Georgia's going to win on Saturday. Now, the honest truth is to once again be self-aware. Of course I'm not going to come on here and pick Texas to win. Of course I'm not going to do that. So all of this should be taken with a grain of salt, because it would just be bad podcast to come on here and be like, hey, y'all, Texas is going to beat Georgia on Saturday. That just would be a bad podcast topic. So, of course, we're not going to do that. And yet, as intellectually honest as I'm capable of being, I do see a path to victory for Georgia. I've told you already. I believe it has to be a high-scoring game. Georgia better bring its full offensive firepower, because I think Texas is scoring 30. So if Texas is scoring 30, or 30 whatever, then Georgia's either going to score a lot and lose close, or score very little and lose by a lot. But I believe the Texas offense is going to show up on Saturday. I do. And I do believe that the Georgia offense can match whatever Texas provides, and Georgia can make enough plays to kind of get this done in sort of shootout fashion. One of the reasons why I believe that can be the case is, while I have a lot of respect for Texas, while I have a lot of respect for Quinn Ewers in particular, and while I have had my questions this year about how Carson Beck has played, I believe that Beck can win the shootout against Quinn Ewers on Saturday. What I have seen from Ewers, for the most part during his Texas career, has been good. The game at Alabama last year I thought was very good. I did not think that he outdueled, certainly, Michael Penix in the college football playoff against Washington a year ago. I think that in that particular game, Ewers showed himself to be for that moment, good, not great, certainly not special in the way that quarterbacks who lead their team to national championships typically are. And here right now, I would say that it's not obvious how healthy he is. I think in the early stage of the game against Oklahoma on Saturday, he had some trouble, played better as it went along. And despite the fact that Beck has certainly not been perfect here this year, maybe there is reason to believe that he's coming into his own at the right time. And if my prediction is correct and Georgia does win this game in somewhat shootout fashion on Saturday, Beck being better than Ewers is kind of the bedrock foundation for all of that. So with that in mind, to go back to Kirby Smart here for a moment, Kirby made the comparison between his guy, Carson Beck, their guy, Quinn Ewers, during his press conference on yesterday. This is what Kirby Smart said.
I think the comparisons between he and Carson are so similar in terms of the kind of quarterbacks they are. They're both better athletes than people think. They both have awareness of coverage, and they're really good in the pocket. I mean, this guy's taking off and hurt people running when he needs to, but he also can stand in the pocket and make all the throws and change the protection. So I've really been impressed with him, but that was the case, even last year when I saw him play.
Yeah, so it's a good quarterback, but not impossible for Beck to get the better of him, especially when you see how Beck has performed for the totality of his career as the Georgia starter. So any prediction for Georgia winning the game on Saturday leans on a big day from Beck. I think he can get it done. And I haven't seen enough from Ewers to make me think that he's some impossible dragon to slay in this spot on Saturday. And that is Around the Doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily. Now, before I bring on Connor Riley, let me also remind you that in order to create the right vibes and get everybody ready for this big game on Saturday, obviously that means for us a big DawgNation invasion. And there is still a limited opportunity for you to be a part of this with us there on Saturday. So I want you to go to DawgNation.com/tailgate for more on that. You can find out how you can get one of the DawgNation Invasion t-shirts. How great does that look? You can find out how you can be a part of the Friday night pregame party, the Saturday all-inclusive tailgate, your food, your beverage, steps from the stadium, getting ready for the Dogs and the Longhorns. And you can, if you need a last-minute hotel room, our friends at Atlanta Sports Trips might have that for you too. They may be sold out of those. The honest truth is, I don't know. But get in there, find out about that. DawgNation.com/tailgate. If you've been kind of on the fence, trying to figure out what your game day plans are, not too late to make a last-minute decision here. We got some space for you. We're going to try to hold it as much as we can. Eventually, they're going to say no more. But for now, I've got the green light. So get there, be a part of it. DawgNation.com/tailgate for more on that. Okay, so before we're done, it's the former quarterback, Jake Fromm. Can't wait to have him on. Always a great pleasure to have him live. But for now, everything in Athens, the preparations for Texas. Is this a game that Georgia can win? Or are the skeptics, both in the media and of the fan base, are the skeptics of Georgia just correct right now? And maybe this is a team that just doesn't quite have it here in 2024. Let's find out now. Connor Riley, DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
I love his coverage of the Georgia Bulldogs at DawgNation.com. It's Connor Riley here right now. And Connor, I'll jump right into it. I see one path to victory for Georgia. I think it's got to be a shootout. I think Texas is scoring at least 30 on Saturday, so Georgia better bring that in more if it wants to win this game. And obviously the foundational belief for Georgia to be able to do that is Carson Beck out-dueling, so to speak, Quinn Ewers here in the spot. Do you believe that Carson Beck can outplay Quinn Ewers on Saturday?
Absolutely. I love that BA is already in political mode discussing path to victory here. I think we're going to get you in front of the touchboard, projecting states and whatnot. I think that this is a game where, and at times on Saturday against Mississippi State, we saw this, where I think you go out there and you see really good things from Carson Beck. You see the explosive plays. But then you see that awful third quarter interception, and it's sort of, I think, emblematic of what we've seen from this team so far this season. And that, yeah, there are a lot of really great things they did. Over 600 yards of offense, 41 points, a 7-minute drive to really shorten the game and milk things out when Georgia absolutely needed to at the end there. But it hasn't all come together. And so I think it'll be an interesting game on Saturday. One thing I will point out, though, about this Texas team and specifically this Texas defense, there's a lot of chatter about them and can Carson go in there and play well. The three Power 4 schools that Texas's defense has faced this year, Mississippi State, Michigan, and Oklahoma, rank, I believe, 78th, 119th, and 127th in the country in total offense. For all that this Georgia offense might not be, it is still worlds better than anything that this Texas team has seen. So I'm not personally taking a whole lot from this Texas defense going into this game. They could absolutely play well. They certainly have the talent and personnel to do so. But they have not seen anything close to what this Georgia offense can be. And quite frankly, I think this Georgia offense has not played their best overall game yet. And I think that to win on Saturday, they're almost certainly going to have to do that against Texas.
So to keep this conversation going, do you see Arch Manning having a role in Saturday's game? I know Kirby was asked about Arch yesterday. Ewers did come back healthy for the game against Oklahoma on Saturday. I've predicted all kind of off-season long throughout this calendar year that Manning would play some sort of significant role against Georgia, whether it's red zone or just a chance to come in the game and provide an offensive spark. I have a hard time imagining that Manning won't have at least some role on Saturday. How big of a factor, obviously putting injury to Ewers aside, how big of a factor, if at all, do you see Arch Manning potentially being in this game?
Why do you believe that he's going to play a role? Because did he play one against Oklahoma last week?
I don't believe that he did. I won't confess to know that for sure. I don't believe that he did. I just think that I think still some looming questions about the Texas running game. I think the fact that you throw all the stops out there. I just think that there is a potential spark, especially down near the red zone, that I think that Manning could give Texas, that I believe they could have a hard time creating in a game like this without a player like that, even if nothing else than just to give Georgia something else to think about and get all your playmakers on the field. I just think that Manning is likely to have some role in a surprise situation, or maybe to Kirby it's not a surprise, but because of that, I believe they'll put him in at some point in time.
I don't believe that. There's nothing that I've seen that would lead me to believe that Arch Manning's going to have a role in this game. You heard Kirby, I think, maybe downplay preparing for Arch going into Saturday. Now, look, backup quarterbacks have had success against Georgia before. But when Quinn Ewers has been healthy this season, he's been the guy there at Texas. They haven't flirted with putting in Arch there for first-team reps. I think they want this to be Quinn Ewers' team. They're not going to cut into his reps that way. If Arch Manning's last name was Smith or something different, I don't think we're having this kind of discussion here, but it is, and that's the reality that we live with. But unless Quinn Ewers is hurt and not able to finish the game, I don't expect to see Arch Manning on Saturday. I think that opens up a can of worms for Texas that I don't think they necessarily want to do so.
Yeah, obviously, to follow up on this, I mean, I think that Ewers has been fine. I don't think he's been sensational. I don't think he played particularly well in the playoff game last year against Washington, although I do think he was pretty good at Alabama. And I guess, now Kirby knows more than I do, but I do think of Manning and Ewers being slightly more different kinds of quarterbacks than Kirby acted like they were yesterday. He sort of treated them like they were the same type of guy. I do think of Manning, and maybe this is just me being 1,000 miles away and not close enough to the situation. I do think of Manning as being more athletic than Ewers is. And as I said before, for a team that lost a couple of running backs before the season began, that athleticism in a red zone situation could be pretty valuable.
It could be, but also, we didn't see them use it against Michigan early in the season. We didn't see them use it against Oklahoma last week. I think that if this is something that they had wanted to build in, I think they would have done so in those games. And the fact that they had not, for all that Michigan and Texas or Michigan and Oklahoma aren't, I think that Steve Sarkisian understands that by playing around with Arch Manning and maybe inserting him at the expense of Quinn Ewers, what that might do from a chemistry standpoint and the can of worms that potentially gets opened up there. I don't think that that's going to be something they're going to want to mess around with. And I'm going to be honest, in the game against Mississippi State, Arch Manning didn't exactly light the world on fire. And so I'm hesitant to think that a guy who hasn't really played in a game of this caliber before, whereas Quinn Ewers, you can knock him all you want. He's played in plenty of big games in his time at Texas. I think that that's a lot to put Arch Manning into.
So I joked about this somewhat before you joined us, that the nature of college football down here in our part of the world is there's just going to be a lot of edginess. We love college football, but college football makes us angry a lot. And I would say there's a good bit of edginess around the Georgia program right now. Some of this is coming from fans. I cited Paul Finebaum earlier. He's asking some pretty, call them provocative questions about UGA's readiness for a game like this. How much of the skepticism that exists around Georgia right now do you view to be fair? And how much of it, if any, do you think of as overstated?
I think there's plenty of both. I think there's fair criticism for this team. I think you've heard Kirby discuss it. This team has not played a complete game this season. And I think 6 games into the year, it's fair to wonder, is this team who it is, where they're capable of 40 great minutes of football and 20 of just so average to bad minutes? And they've got to find a way to shrink that down, especially in a game against Texas. But I think you point out as well the edginess, spitefulness, rudeness, trash talking, all of that makes college football great, and that's what makes it enjoyable. But I think you've seen, and this is a Georgia program that, things were as good as they were ever going to be for Georgia as any college football program. Winning back-to-back national titles, a 42-game regular season win streak. And then you come off a loss, and you've had a couple games now, Kentucky, Mississippi State, even Auburn, a game Georgia controlled beginning and end. People weren't satisfied with how Georgia played in that game. I think Georgia is a victim of its own success. And so it'll be interesting seeing in this Texas game how sort of, I think, people adjust. I know you and I were talking in the press box of the Alabama game. I think that loss did show that, for all that this season might and can still be, this is sort of a new normal or a new era that Georgia is having to get used to. And I think Georgia fans are having a tough time adjusting to that. But for all the negativity that I've seen out there, and believe me, I've seen a lot, look, as negative as you want to be about this Georgia's team is still one of the top 10 teams in the country. You put Georgia and Penn State on a neutral field, I'm still taking Georgia comfortably to win that game. And so, this game against Texas, it's tough. I believe Georgia is the first team since 1996 Florida to play 2 top 5 teams in the AP poll on the road. And that Florida team found a way to win and ultimately get to and win a national championship that season. So if Georgia can weather this schedule, which after this game doesn't look quite as daunting as we thought it would a couple of weeks ago, I think Georgia's going to be just fine. But is Georgia this juggernaut number 1 team that we thought they were, the clear best team in the country at the start of the season? I think we can safely say at this point in the year, they have not shown to be that.
So in the time we have left, I want to talk about what I've been talking about a lot this week, that at one point, Georgia was just in a unique category in college football. They were better than everybody else. They were capable of playing differently than everybody else. You just talked about this. They could smother Tennessee in 2022. They could completely shove Michigan around in an Orange Bowl. They were just capable of playing a brand of football that no one else could match, and it was very, very successful. Well, now Georgia, as you just pointed out, looks more like the rest of the sport. And so my assumption is they will now need to win the way that most of the rest of the sport wins. Big games are high-scoring affairs. Ohio State and Oregon, 2 teams that came in Saturday with better defenses than offenses, yet the game was played with almost 70 combined points. That is just what college football is. Big games are typically high-scoring on both sides. I believe that's the only way Georgia wins on Saturday, that in its own stadium, Texas probably scores. Georgia, somewhat because of some defensive vulnerabilities and somewhat because that's just what college football is, has got to score a lot to win as well. That it's basically 70-plus points, and Georgia's got to be 35, 36, 37, 38, if not 40, in order to win. How much of my assessment would you align yourself with?
I don't totally – I understand where you're coming from. And, yes, the need to score points, I think, is paramount in a game like this, especially with what we've seen from this Georgia defense where, quite frankly, I don't think Georgia's cornerbacks are all that well coached and all that good. And this pass rush just has not been able to get home. So I think that leads into some of the need to score points there. But, again, this is a Georgia team that's still plenty capable of going out there and winning a game. And so – I think, the need to say, they've got to change how they play. They've got to be high scoring, be aggressive. Georgia was aggressive coming out in that Alabama game, and I think it actually hurt them in the way that they played in the first half. And they still found a way to turn that into a high scoring game. I think if you're Georgia, you have to go out there and try and be who you are, not drastically change yourself for one game like this. This is a game where, whoever's able to control the tempo and control the pace of this game, I think is going to have a long way of winning it. I don't think that Georgia should go out here and say, damn the torpedoes, we've got to score a gazillion points to try and win. But I think that this team has shown when you give them that extra down, when they're being aggressive on 4th down, they tend to make the most of it. And so it's blending that and figuring out and finding out who they are. Georgia is going to win if they're able to play their game. They shouldn't let Texas try and dictate how this game is going to be played and thus try and turn this into a shootout, because that is what I believe Texas wants to do with an offensive mind in Steve Sarkisian. They have to go out there and to sort of, use an old tired phrase, run their own race, run their own 5K, because if they try and get into a shootout and get in a place where they're not comfortable, you wonder, just because Georgia does not traditionally play that way, are they going to feel comfortable doing so?
Well said by Connor Riley, indeed. Hey, thanks for being here. I want to invite people to check out, you got a great story up about Mikael Williams and the need for a pass rush in a game like this, because, by the way, even in a shootout win for Georgia against Ohio State, Dogs still had 4 sacks that day. There's still a role for defense, even in a game that could have a lot of points on both sides. Your story on that's really good. You obviously had a chance to exchange with Kirby Smart on that yesterday. People should check that out, and everything else you're writing at DawgNation.com. Connor, thank you for your time. I'll look forward to talking to you soon.
One quick thing before I go, the Georgia Tech game in 2025, that is going to be played in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. That came out just before we come on the air here today. So next year's game, which was originally set to be played in Bobby Dodd, will now be played at a neutral site in Mercedes-Benz Stadium.
Fascinating stuff. Connor, thank you for that. Appreciate it, and we will talk to you soon.
Yep, as always, it was a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, let me deal with that little bit of breaking news. As Connor points out, we do have that now, that information that next year, what should be a Georgia Tech home game at Bobby Dodd Stadium is being moved to Mercedes-Benz Stadium. This reported by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, I believe exclusively, earlier this morning. So it'll be some facts here around this. The first time a game for Georgia and Georgia Tech has been played off campus since 1912. How about this? Georgia Tech set to make $10 million for moving its home game to Mercedes-Benz Stadium. They say the game will be back at Bobby Dodd in 2027. And here's a big one. The game will not be included in season ticket packages for Georgia Tech. So let me spend like 60 seconds on this, then we're going to move on to something else here for a moment. Tech fans are going to be probably pretty upset about this. That obviously, if they play, there's a reason they've never done this before. Mercedes-Benz Stadium is a much bigger stadium. Just given the typical fan behavior, the odds are there'll be a lot more Georgia fans at Mercedes-Benz Stadium than Tech fans. There are already more Georgia fans at Bobby Dodd than Tech fans, and yet that's with Tech controlling the season tickets. If Tech fans don't get a chance to control the ticket inventory, then clearly Georgia has a chance to kind of take that stadium over. Tech fans are going to probably be not super happy about this, especially those who were given to tradition, which if I was a Tech fan, I'm sure I'd probably be arguing something similar. But the financial figure on this is pretty staggering, $10 million. Now, I don't know if that factors in the cost of hosting a home game, because home games can be pretty expensive, paying security, stadium operations, things like that. That's pretty expensive. So I don't know if the $10 million also factors in what they don't have to spend for the home game. But if you also add that to that, this is a huge financial windfall for Tech, who's made some announcements as of late about wanting to be much more aggressive from a financial standpoint. But I think the real takeaway is that in the age we're moving into, if you've got a chance to make some money, any program's going to do it. If it means losing your big home game against your in-state rival, if the money's big enough, you've got to do it. And the relevance for Georgia is, when you think about Georgia, Florida, and Jacksonville, previous years, hot topic. Should the game stay in Jacksonville or should it not? Bottom line moving forward is, no matter what the feelings of the average fans are, and no matter what the feeling of Kirby Smart is if you've got somebody willing to give you millions of dollars because of the revenue sharing era we're about to enter into, no one's going to turn down millions of dollars. No one. So as long as Jacksonville wants to pay Georgia, Dogs are going there for the game against Florida. And as long as Mercedes-Benz Stadium is ponying up big bucks for a program like Tech, even if it's somewhat embarrassing to lose your home game against UGA, Tech is not in a position to say no to that right now. Something else you shouldn't say no to, that's a chance to be on board a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Let's go cruise around the SEC right now, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Obviously, remind you, great chance to be on board with us. Utopia of the Seas coming up in April for our DawgNation cruise. I'll tell you this, I was also thinking about this on the way in this morning. I need to get my family on a cruise again. We have not taken a family cruise together in a little while here. And I was trying to think, can we get this done? It's fun. It's one of those things sort of fun to think about. And kind of plan and kind of – it's one of the – I really would like to get my whole family together here for a Royal Caribbean cruise sometime in 2025, so I'll keep you updated on that. But as you're making your own plans to do that, Jessica Slater is a wonderful travel agent to help you. And my first call when I'm planning my cruise vacation with Royal Caribbean will be to Jessica Slater. You can give her a call yourself, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com, for a lot more on that. She'll take great care of you and get you ready to go when it comes to a wonderful Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Okay, let me do a little housekeeping here for a moment. I've got a couple of SEC stories I want to hit here, but we're a little late now after the breaking news involving the Georgia Tech game. Do we have Jake Fromm ready to go right now? Is that a yes? Okay, why don't we do this? Let's bring the music down. I'll hit a couple of stories, especially related to a couple of these SEC things, on the other side here. But I don't want to keep Jake waiting. People like that. So let's kind of dive in here right now and bring Jake Fromm into the program fresh off a Detroit Lions absolute blasting of the Dallas Cowboys. Always fun social media stuff after a Cowboys loss. This week, no different on that. But also a hot topic with the Dogs getting ready to play the Texas Longhorns. Jake, thank you for being a part of DawgNation Daily here today and our Kroger Fresh Take. We appreciate you being on the show.
Always good to be here, Brandon. Thank you for having me.
So if you don't mind, we're obviously talking a lot about Georgia and Texas on Saturday. As someone who kind of sees this a little bit differently than perhaps I do, give me your early thoughts on where the game stands.
Yeah, I think this is a really cool, really unique opportunity for this football team to go into another just really, really tough and hostile environment. I really like where they're at with the experience of going into Bryant-Denny Stadium and the way they finished in that football game. I think they're going to be able to take a lot of good things from that game and being able to transfer it over going into this one. So feeling very confident going into this week. Man, I think Carson's playing some really good ball right now. He's seeing the field very well. Yeah, man, I'm excited about this game, and especially where Texas is at, the way they finished strong in that game versus Oklahoma. Man, this is going to be one heck of a football game.
So what I have said is I see this being a shootout because that's just sort of what college football is now. Oregon, Ohio State, two teams that came into the game. The Ohio State defense actually been a little bit better than its offense has been going back all of last year. Oregon's got Dan Lanning as a coach. Dylan Gabriel have been struggling at quarterback. I would say that's a little bit more of a kind of a defensive-oriented type team. And yet you put them on the field together, it's offense, it's success, it's almost 70 combined points. I just see at least 70 combined points for Georgia and Texas on Saturday, or somewhere around 70 combined points here in this spot too. Do you agree with me on that when two big college football teams just get together in this day and age, when Georgia had the best defense in the world, well, of course, they could avoid those type of games. But now I don't know that Georgia is as capable of avoiding those types of games as it used to be, and that Georgia on Saturday may be called upon to win a game the way that everybody else these days seems to be called upon to win them, which is finding a way to just sort of outscore and out-explosive whoever it is that you're playing on the other side.
Yeah, it's definitely a trend and a theme right now in college football, especially this middle of the season where offenses are starting to get their stride, quarterbacks are becoming more comfortable. I can definitely see this being a shootout, 70-plus combined points. The secondary for UGA hasn't necessarily been great, so to speak, and therefore it puts a lot more pressure on the offense to go down and score points. Now, Carson threw the ball 48 times last game, and the score to me was a little bit closer than what you saw with your eyes. Like, I never really saw this game as being close. It just happened to be there late at the end of the game with the score, but I don't know if the recipe for success for this Georgia football team is Carson Beck throwing the ball 48 times. It's just never been a recipe of success for a Kirby smart coach football team. I want to see just more dominance at the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball, from the defensive line setting the tone and the offensive line setting the tone as well, and being able to say, hey, man, in the second half of this game, we're going to run the football and there's nothing you can do to stop it. So I think this game is going to be decided about how the bigs play this football team and who's able to play more physical and impose their will on the other team.
Why do you think that Georgia has had difficulty doing that this year? Is that because of something the offensive line is not doing? Is that because of something that, maybe it's just not the same level of running back, or is it just simply a slow start and it's going to be fixed starting this Saturday, which would certainly be a nice thing to consider. Why do you think, because it kind of took a step in the positive direction against Auburn, but didn't really carry over to the game against Mississippi State? What would you diagnose the issue as being right now?
Yeah, I mean, I can see a lot of different factors here. I mean, you could talk about the NIL and the parity in college football and different guys going different places. So, your backups aren't as good and they're not competing with your starters, and therefore your starters maybe not quite being as good, or just the theme and trend of college football and throwing the ball and everybody liking that. I think I can count on one hand the amount of times that Georgia's been under center this year. And I think that helps a lot in the run game of being able to get your running backs downhill and them have a little bit more vision. And you can talk about, too, the backs. I think the backs could be playing a little bit better and being able to create some explosives for those guys. But the trend that you're seeing with the Georgia football team on offense is they're running a lot of this perimeter stuff, a lot of perimeter screens, getting the ball to the receivers, and basically just using that as an extension of the run game. So it's just kind of a little bit of a give and take. And, some is good and some you may want late in the game to say, hey, man, we got to finish this out and get some bigs in there and run the ball. So it just kind of depends week to week if you can be versatile and depending on what the defense is giving you, especially early in the game. This is why you're seeing all the perimeter stuff, the arounds, reverses that you're seeing with the receivers. But, man, at the end of the day, there is nothing like taking your running back and just going right down the middle of the defense, and there's nothing they can do about it.
So let me ask you this, and obviously there's a chance I'm wrong. I'm wrong about plenty, but if I am correct, and this ends up being a high-scoring game on Saturday, both teams kind of bringing kind of an A-level offensive performance. You played in a game like that. You won a game like that in the Rose Bowl against Oklahoma. Oklahoma sort of always played those type of games, and on that particular day, y'all were kind of forced to play that because Oklahoma brought a lot of offensive firepower to begin the game. Jake, as you know, that was so different than what y'all had been doing for most of that season, where you're very efficient offensively, a lot of very good running game. You're successful throwing the ball. Defense is just putting clamps on, teams. And y'all were kind of the old death march, suffocating teams a lot in the second half. Against Oklahoma, it had to be a very different kind of game. What was the feeling on the sideline, maybe in particular for you as the quarterback? What was the feeling when you realized what we have been doing to win all year long is not the way in which this game is going to be decided if we're going to win it? Did anything kind of change with you mentally, knowing that you were, at that point in time, in a completely different game than you had been playing for most of that season?
Yeah, I mean, for us on that sideline, we never really felt uncomfortable. We never had to press and feel like we had to do something more than what we were already doing, something bigger than ourselves. We were just operating our offense, man. There was really nothing that they could do to stop us. I mean, we were throwing the ball, we were running the ball, had some good play actions. And we were converting third down. So as long as we were moving the ball, man, we felt we were just imposing our will on them, and there's nothing they could do to stop us. So the only thing that kind of got us in trouble were a turnover here and there. But then at the end of the day, when you can run and operate your offense that you feel comfortable doing, that you've done the entire course of the season, at that point, you just hope that there's enough time on the clock to be able to score the points because you're capable of moving the ball.
You said a moment ago that you like the way that Carson Beck's playing right now. I think a lot of Georgia fans will be happy to hear that. We've certainly talked a lot about Beck's play when you and I have gotten together thus far this season. But how about the comparison between Beck and Ewers? How do you see that battle potentially playing out on Saturday?
Yeah, I'm really so excited to be able to sit down and watch this because it's just two top-level quarterbacks going at it on two really good football teams. So I'm excited to see what the offensive coordinators, as far as a scheme and a game plan, put on their plate. Man, are they going to kind of flood these guys with concepts and drop back pass game, or are they going to kind of take some stuff off and take a little bit of pressure off? I don't know. I'm excited to see what they give these guys, but both of these guys are game changers and can go and win a football game when needed and when called upon. So I could definitely see this being a game where whoever has the ball last wins this football game.
Got another topic I want to hit with you before we say goodbye. Let me remind folks, though, prior to that, it's our Kroger Fresh Date with Jake Fromm here today. Let me also remind you that Kroger is really your destination for all your Halloween needs. My family, we love Halloween. So many of you are kind of the same way. It's decorations, it's candy. It's just always a lot of fun. And obviously the best way to take advantage of everything Kroger's got for Halloween is to become a Kroger Boost member. This way you can get it delivered straight to you. If you don't have time to go in store, they can bring it to you. Or if you do want to drive around and maybe take advantage of the fact that the stuff that you're already buying at your local Kroger, you can earn twice the fuel points when you make those purchases. So a great way to take advantage of the best stuff for Kroger. Halloween coming up, the holiday season after that, is by becoming a Kroger Boost member. You can go to Kroger.com to find out more, or Kroger.com/boost to go directly to the sign up and become a Kroger Boost member here today. Jake, Saturday is one of those games that is very, I think, reflective of the new era in which we live in which it's a 12-team playoff. There's additional margin for error, but because Georgia lost to Alabama, all of a sudden a loss to Texas means you've given all that margin for error away, and now you are essentially playing back against the wall the rest of the season. And that's still a Tennessee game. It's a road game at Ole Miss, and any game that could potentially be problematic, just given the fact that Georgia also had to go down to the wire against Kentucky. So reflective of this current age in which we're all living here, how much pressure do you think is on Georgia on Saturday?
Yeah, a lot, honestly. I know they got a bad taste in their mouth when they lost to Alabama. I don't know if they quite got it out of their mouth when they played Mississippi State. I think they felt like they had a lot left on the field, especially on defense. So, man, this is a huge and big opportunity and really going to be indicative of what the rest of the season looks like. Just like you mentioned, hey, are we going to have our backs against the wall and win every single football game? Or are we going to kind of give ourselves a little bit of breathing room here and give ourselves some confidence going into the second half of this year? I don't know. It's 100% possible either way. But, man, this is a big football game, and there's going to be a lot riding on this game.
Jake, it's so much fun. I appreciate your insight and all that. And as you said, we're all looking forward to just sinking our teeth into this one and seeing how it plays out, because there's going to be seemingly plenty of drama on both sides. I appreciate your time. Continued success to you, and we'll look forward to having you back as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take again on DawgNation Daily very soon.
Thank you, Brandon. Appreciate you.
Great stuff there from the former Georgia quarterback weighing in on how it plays out on Saturday. Let me also say this real quick, and then I want to jump back into a couple of SEC stories before we wrap up today. I think the other thing that's really interesting, it's so weird to be going somewhere we've never been before. And by we, I mean all of us who are going there, Georgia fans traveling in large numbers. It just seems like this really is two just separate cultures getting ready to battle. Is that crazy? It just sort of feels like, there's just not a ton of overlap here between the Longhorns and the Dogs. Obviously, Bill Norton may be the rare example of that. Kirby obviously knows Steve Sarkisian very well. That's true. But this is really a lot of new on Saturday. A Texas team that for my entire life has always kind of been, in what I think of, in another part of the country. Yeah, you have the 2018 Sugar Bowl and the 83 Cotton Bowl, but for the most part, it's just been something different. And on Saturday, it's the same field at the same time, battling for the same things. So we all try to kind of figure out what Georgia is here in 2024. I think we're also having to figure out what this new look SEC is now that Austin is one of the destinations in the conference. And that is pretty strange in its own right. Okay, a couple of SEC stories, kind of backtrack here for a moment. We kind of had the breaking news involving the Georgia Tech game being in Atlanta in Mercedes-Benz Stadium for 2025. So our friends at the AJC broke that story. So let me jump back into a couple of other stories here for a moment. Games that we did not touch on yesterday. The Tennessee-Florida thing is obviously really interesting in that for Tennessee, it's another day where they kind of only looked okay. And maybe this is just not quite living up to the promise of what some of us, including myself, thought about Tennessee near the beginning of the season. Or maybe this is more of a carryover for what's been going on for like 20 years. Tennessee, million different coaches, million different rosters, has just, for whatever reason, always had its problems against Florida. And on Saturday, it was true once again. Florida easily covered the spread, had a chance to win the game outright. Tennessee walks it off in overtime. Isn't it amazing how long a narrative like that has prevailed? Florida, no matter how bad it is in a given year, always seems to have a chance to beat Tennessee. And in a year like 2023, actually beat them, even though Tennessee on paper was a far better team. Strange how all of that typically just regenerates itself every single year. And so going forward, you got two big questions. Well, has Florida improved? No, because they beat UCF. They played close against Tennessee. Graham Mertz, who's probably been better than some people realize, is now injured. It is the DJ Lagway show going forward. And I think you're about to see some positive chatter around Florida that, hey, maybe they're ready to start playing better. And maybe they're ready to surprise some people. This might be, in my mind, the right time to sell as high as you're going to be able to sell on Florida. That the UCF team that they beat has actually had its own struggles. The game against Tennessee is just a continuation of a long-keeping tradition of playing somewhat close against the Vols. That Florida, now that they've kind of had a little bit of a death rattle here, they might actually be ready to go into their full-on tailspin, because I don't believe that Billy Napier's up to the task of being a coach in the SEC, and I do believe he could be about to prove it. On the flip side, though, what about the winning team in that game? What about Tennessee? I love making predictions. I think really the only thing truly interesting about sports talk is a prediction. Anything else is just sort of mumbo-jumbo in one ear and out the other. All of our conversation, all of our opinions have to be distilled down to a prediction that we can either be judged as right or wrong on. Otherwise, it's all just noise. So I love making predictions. I get them right, I get them wrong, but I love predictions. I think this Alabama-Tennessee game on Saturday is one of the most difficult games to predict that we're going to see. Obviously we'll arrive at a prediction eventually, but ultimately I have no idea what to expect in this. Alabama's had its struggles. Tennessee's had its struggles. Surprisingly, at least the early line had Bama favored on the road. I was a little bit surprised by that. Basically, maybe they've seen enough from Tennessee to kind of trust the roster strength of Alabama. What a fascinating game this is going to be on Saturday. Let me do two other things real quick. Obviously, I think Vanderbilt deserves a lot of credit, which is not something we've said on this show a lot over the years. But after an incredibly emotional win, home game against Alabama, to have to go on the road as about a 2-touchdown underdog and still win the game outright, as they did at Kentucky this past Saturday. What an amazing accomplishment that is. Amazing, amazing accomplishment. And this, to me, seems to be real. The only two losses for Vanderbilt on the year, on the road at Missouri, a game they took all the way down to the wire, had to go to overtime. They did lose to Georgia State, which is, I guess, somewhat embarrassing. But the truth is, it took sort of a miracle play at the end to see Georgia State win that. That Vanderbilt right now looks like one of the real turnarounds in the SEC, remarkably so. And this is essentially to me a top 25 team right now. I don't know if they were in the AP top 25 this week or not, but this to me is a team that's one of the 25 best teams in the country. And if you're watching a video, the guy you see on your screen, Clark Lee, deserves a lot of credit for that. But obviously Diego Pavia, the Vandy quarterback, he's been the real find for the Commodores. What an amazing story. I was going to do something on Brian Kelly, kind of a cool stat about him that I saw, but it's a little bit late in the show. Let me just save that for another time. But needless to say that Kelly did something on Saturday that he's been doing for his entire career. Success in these kind of close one-score games. Really amazing how many of those he's won. So we'll do more of that here later on, and we'll kind of make that sort of a weird version, backtracking, if you will, cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Okay, before we say goodbye, let me also give a shout to our friends here at Discover Dunwoody, because, you start thinking about what's still to come for, Georgia. We just said a moment ago, hey, in 2025, the Georgia Tech game is going to be at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. That means more of you will have a chance to get tickets, more of an opportunity to kind of travel into Atlanta for the game if you don't live in the Atlanta area. So our friends at Discover Dunwoody are always going to be a destination we want you to consider when it comes to that, because here in the Dunwoody area, where you broadcast the show from each and every day, you've got wonderful shopping, wonderful dining, and a lot of hotel accommodation offerings that are super convenient to Atlanta, because you can get a couple MARTA stations within walking distance of a lot of these hotels, all kinds of great restaurants, all kinds of great fun. Really, you should check that out. And obviously, we're hopeful to see Georgia back in Mercedes-Benz Stadium maybe a couple more times here this year, certainly for the SEC Championship. Great chance that can be true. So I want you to check out Discover Dunwoody. If you go to the website, discoverdunwoody.com, you can find out about all the great food, all the great shopping experiences, the wonderful dining. DiscoverDunwoody.com. whether you're coming in for the SEC championship, we hope, next year's Georgia Tech game at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, we just found out about today, all kinds of fun stuff. DiscoverDunwoody.com has got you ready for all of that. All right, here's a favor as we say goodbye. For our golden shoe today, this is what I'm going to encourage you to do. For the rest of the week, vibes, total confession, maybe not the best they've been. A lot of folks are a little bit concerned about Georgia here right now. A lot of folks wonder, can Georgia get it done against Texas? Well, we believe that energy matters. I thought that Davin Bellamy did a great job saying that last week, that energy is real. And so we're going to try to up the energy level as Georgia gets ready to go to Texas. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you the golden shoe today on the screen. I simply want you to send me a picture. You don't have to caption it. You don't have to do anything. You can email it to me. You can hit me up on X. You can whatever. Send it to one of the other platforms. They'll make sure it gets to me. Just simply show me your picture of you. Give me that horns down. And for the rest of the week, we're going to do as many horns down as we can to get ready for Saturday as the Dogs try to put the horns down and get that win at Texas. So for golden shoes the rest of the week, I want to see your horns down picture. We'll give you a shout out here live on the air. And we're going to create good vibes ahead of Georgia and Texas on Saturday. Let's get it going horns down style. Send those to me. We're going to put them on the show during this portion of the program. I know you'll all have a lot of fun with that. Lousy, stinking Gators, they're down bad too. 1,438 days. That is how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. You'll have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. And on video, time now for RS Andrews Cool Down. RS Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs, they show up on time. They do the all the great work for you. I'm looking at Kaylee Mansell here. She sent me a great picture. She's already got her horns down thing going here. So we'll show you that on the screen here this week and have some fun with all of that. But y'all check out RS Andrews because their horns down this week too. In fact, our buddy Dari is going to be with us for our DawgNation Invasion to give you an idea of how big of a deal that's going to be. Dari going to be horns down in style. Can't wait for all of that. I'll be totally honest with you. Horns down are a little bit hard for me to do. I don't have, is it dexterity? Is that the word? I don't have great finger dexterity. My ring finger doesn't want to cooperate a lot of times. And so, like, doing the horns down, not super easy for me. But we're gonna do a bunch of horns down. We already got some good ones kind of rolling in here already, as Kaylee was just sharing with me. So let's jump in here. We'll get some comments. We'll find out how everybody's doing today. Some of these I can't read. Andrew Hughes says, what's up with all the fair weather fans? So let me say this a lot of ways. A, when you're Georgia and you've had as much success, the bandwagon's just going to grow. And I am always very welcoming of the bandwagon people. I think being a Georgia fan is one of the great decisions you can make in your life. So if you're new to Georgia fandom, I'm glad you're here. Not every fan probably feels that way because kind of like the cool band that was, hot before they played Coachella. Some of you were like, well, listen, I was here for the first album. You couldn't even name a song off the first album. I do get that. I'm a little bit more probably welcoming in the fact that, hey, if you're late to the party, I'm just glad you're here. So there are going to be fair weather fans of Georgia, kind of Johnny-come-latelys to the program because that's just what success breeds. I don't believe that everyone who's critical of Georgia right now is a fair weather fan. I think there is some legitimate criticism of Georgia to offer. I truly do. I would also say that, and I've been critical of this before, there are some fans who try to mitigate their disappointment by a potential Georgia loss by acting as if the loss has already taken place. And that is a very, very weird psychological phenomenon, but I do see it a lot. And perhaps we're seeing that here right now. So the question about the mood of the Georgia fan base is a fairly complicated one, as I just described. Crow King 123 on the subject of Elijah Griffin committing on Friday. Yeah, as good as one can feel. I'm feeling pretty good about that, especially coming off the visit this past weekend. Yes. Wyatt Fielden says, what's the headline if Georgia wins on Saturday? I like what Jake Fromm said about the experience going into Bam and how Beck is playing. I believe Kirby will get the defense ready. Yeah, I didn't want to make more of this than needed to be, but let's keep in mind here. If you go back and listen, and they're all archived, you can hear them all. Week to week to week, Jake has been pretty even-handed, I would say, with his discussion about Carson Beck. At times, I think that Jake has let it be known that he thinks that Carson Beck could be playing better than he has played. And so when Jake says today, boy, I really like what I've seen from Carson the last couple of weeks, I take that to be pretty seriously because I think that Jake's description of Carson in previous weeks has been pretty accurate. I think it's been pretty fair. In other words, it's not just the kind of flowery, oh, our guy's the best, rah, rah, rah. I think that Jake has been a little bit more analytical than that. He's been a little bit more willing to speak candidly about that. And so if he says he's playing well, I take that pretty seriously. But as far as the headline goes, let me plug in for a second. As far as the headline goes, here's what I think. Look, Texas is a really good team. But Georgia has been a really good team for a while, at least since 2021, which was also Steve Sarkisian's first year. So you've got the situation where over the course of a period of years, Georgia's just proven more than Texas has. Now, there's also the statement, well, every year is a new identity. Honestly, it's good for coaches to think that way, and it's good for players to think that way. But the honest truth is that's not how college football works. That's not. That you do carry over performance over the course of years. And one of the best predictive measures for how well you'll do in a given year is what you as an organization, what a program, what you've done in previous years. That's just sort of the way the college football works. And so Georgia, over the course of the last few years, has just proven a lot more than Texas has. And maybe on Saturday, Georgia can show that there is still remnants of what Georgia has been on display and that Texas hasn't quite graduated from whatever they were in 2021 and 2022. That's what you're hopeful of. So your question is, if a Georgia win takes place, what's the headline going to be? That the better program won the game. That the program that had proven more, that had been around longer, that had been more consistent, found a way to also get it done here. And the Texas moment in the sun, if it's going to happen, is going to have to wait a little bit longer. That's what the headline would be. MG on the subject of Kirby coaching Aaron Rodgers. Yeah, we joked about that the other day because there was that dumb internet thing that was out there about whatever. And that would obviously never happen, but it is kind of funny to imagine like the two very, very different personalities perhaps clashing with each other. Keith Finley on some of the Mike Bobo criticism. We're seeing a lot of that, obviously. David Wayne Carroll says you need an early lead and a couple of turnovers. Yeah, I didn't play this clip because I just didn't have time to, but in the Paul Finebaum thing that I played earlier, in that same conversation, Paul would go on to say that he thought that Texas could overcome a slow start against Georgia, but Georgia could not overcome a slow start against Texas. Well, on the part of this for Georgia, I mean, I do agree that if Georgia gets off to another slow start, it's probably going to be another loss, the same way Alabama was. I do kind of agree with that. But this idea that Texas is more equipped to handle a slow start, I'm not quite so sure I agree with that. I think that Texas is good offensively. This is not the greatest show on turf, though, necessarily. But obviously, for either team, in other words, it's good, as David points out, to get the early lead. And obviously, turnovers. If it's the kind of narrow, hotly contested game that I'm anticipating, then any turnover at the wrong moment could change the whole deal there. So let's see. Matthew Goodwin says, how many dogs do you think will be in Texas? I remember in 2018, now this was not a good day for Georgia. They got beat badly by LSU. But in 2018, for the game against LSU, which is a long way away from home, there had to be 20,000 Georgia fans there that day. Could there be 20,000 on Saturday? Now, it's hard to get 20,000 because this is even farther away. It's incredibly expensive, and you got the challenge of the F1 race. But could you get 20,000 on Saturday? That may be too much. I believe there'll be more than 10. So somewhere between low water mark of 10, high water mark of 20, 12 to 15, something along those lines. I mean, there's a lot of chatter about fans who are going. So you do get the sense this is going to be a significant showing. If it's 20,000, that's enough to notice. You'll hear them in the stadium. And maybe just Texas has done enough with what I believe was an intentional act of scheduling this the F1 race to keep Georgia fans out. There was an appetite for about 20 to be there, at least. Will that many actually be there? We'll find out. But if you want to split the difference and maybe say 15, that's fine. But we saw about 20 there for the LSU game back in 2018. That was a long way to travel. Mike Mazzell says you cannot start slow. Got to jump on these horns fast. I agree. You got to score quickly. You got to score fast. You got to get involved there. Matthew says that'd be pretty respectable. Yeah, it would be. Now, it may also be, it just may be logistically impossible to get that many in, but they perhaps could, and under normal circumstances, I think they definitely would. We'll see how many of them did figure out how to get there, given the travel challenges imposed on Georgia for that game. Let us see what else. Don Williams says that game hurt, too. The LSU game in 2018 was a tough one. It was. William Camacho says, like I said Saturday when I came to the UGA bookstore, if Georgia loses this game, you can kiss the SEC championship goodbye. And for the most part, that's probably true. I believe that William's probably right about that. What else is in here? Ish Murphy, good to see you in here as always. Glad to see Isha in here today. I believe Isha said he's coming on our DawgNation cruise, too. Isha, didn't you tell us that at one point in time? George Herndon says, show the Georgia pride. No doubt about that. We're excited about that. What else? Let me go to DawgNation.com. DT says his daughter has her dog, Austin DawgNation Invasion Tailgate Ticks. Super excited. I'm going to tell her to meet Kaylee, her sister from another mother. Well, there you go. That's exciting. Glad to have your daughter there. Make sure she says hello to us. I'm sure Kaylee would be glad to see her too. That's really cool. Johnny Prescott says, interesting similarities between Georgia and Texas. Each has 4 national titles with some gaps in between them. 2 Heisman winners, Sinkwich and Herschel for Georgia, Campbell and Williams for Texas. Georgia spoiled UT's national title hopes in 83 and about to ruin them in 2024. Go Dogs, horns down. Johnny, that's great. Well done. Well done indeed. And the first Georgia game I had any living memory of was the 83 Cotton Bowl. I had been to a Georgia game prior to that, but I don't really remember it all that well. The first game I remember everybody making a really big deal about was the 83 Cotton Bowl. It's very little, very young boy, but my grandfather thought it was a big deal. There was all the joking about, what time is it in Texas? 10 to 9. There was all of that. I really remember that very well. I don't remember really watching the game. I watched it some. Don't remember watching the game, but I remember the reaction after Georgia won. I do remember that. Yeah, Johnny Prescott gives you the what time is it in Texas, 10 to 9. I love that so much. When Georgia played Texas in the 2018 Cotton, we'll edit this out. Let me try again. When Georgia played Texas in the 2018 Sugar Bowl, before that game, we brought in John Lastinger to the show. Lastinger, though, was the quarterback when Georgia beat Texas in the Cotton Bowl. That was really fun. He was great to talk to. I loved going back and reminiscing about all of that. That was fun. All right, let me bounce around the comment section one more time. We'll get ready to wrap it up for today. Back on Facebook for a moment. They're having a little bit of a conversation about the bandwagon-style fans. And, yeah, I think that, you can't have as much success as Georgia's had without getting some of that. It's just true. You're just going to have some of that, and I'm okay with that. But I think their feeling about Georgia will be a little bit different. That's probably some of what you see going on with some of the students and the issue with the empty seats, which has been a really hot topic. We obviously addressed that yesterday, and I know that it's a big topic for DawgNation on Instagram, too. James Crump says Texas offensive line against our defensive line should be about even. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those battles that Georgia needs to find a way to win, and it's probably a fair fight in order to get that done. What else? Robert Brown says, keep Uga away from that bull, Bevo. Yeah, we'll always be mad at Bevo for really kind of cheap-shotting Uga that day. We think it could have been a different fight. Once again, we think it could have been a much fairer fight if Uga had a chance to see Bevo coming, but Bevo kind of flanked him, pinned him in, and was attacking him, clearly showing himself to – it's obvious that Bevo had not been in a major bowl in a few decades. Marshall Fleming says Ewers does not have great receivers this year, does not run well, and he throws it fast. I really believe we run the dime package and dare them to run because you can't pass short yardage against our dime package. Could be the case. As you said, I mean, the element of athleticism really isn't there for Ewers, and I don't think this is the same caliber of Texas wide receivers. Now, some of that may sound like I'm, underselling Texas. I'm certainly not trying to, but I do think that this is a game in which the Georgia at its quarterback spot with Carson, I think he can outduel Ewers. I really do. I think that he can. Melissa Clark said her uncle gave her a Cotton Bowl shirt that year. Boy, that's a cool thing to have, Melissa. What a cool thing. And a great memory, I'm sure. What else? JC says after that Cotton Bowl win, Georgia kind of went into a little bit of a tailspin. They certainly didn't achieve at the same level, and those, unfortunately, were the years that, that's where my fandom was built. As I said, I barely remember the '83 Cotton Bowl. I really started getting hardcore heavy into Georgia, probably like 85, 86, like 87, 88. I'm like crying crocodile tears, like just boo-hooing after every Georgia loss, and there were a few. So my fan, like when I became hardcore is not even the word, just intense Georgia fan, would have been 86, 87, 88, a little bit in 85, 86, 87, 88, those kind of final years of the Dooley era. That's when I was just living and dying with every game. Good gracious. I was living and dying with every game. D-Mart says he was even in a meeting. Now he needs 39 minutes of a cool down to make up for it. Well, I don't quite know we can give that to you today, but we'll try to make it up to you this week. I am glad you're back from the meeting, though. We're all in favor of meetings being as short as possible. Andrew Hughes says an email address for the Horns Down. You can do brandon.adams, DawgNation.com. Brandon.adams at DawgNation.com. You can do that. I'm not always the best about checking my email. I'll be totally honest. I know some of you probably get frustrated by that. I'm sorry. I'm not a great email person. But I will try to be looking for these Horns Down. I will. Yeah, so Christy, Brandon.adams at DawgNation.com. You can send it there. And I know that some of you have emailed me before probably, and I'm not, like I said, I'm not very good with email. I just am sort of a disorganized mess. But I will try to watch my email for these. All right, anything else? Grade A says he wants to see more press and smart blitzes. As I said, go back to the Peach Bowl in 22 when Georgia beat Ohio State. That's a game that's played in the 40s. But Georgia still had a couple of defensive moments that made that win more possible. They had a couple of sacks, four sacks in total. All of those moments mattered. Yes, so if you want to send the email, a lot of people are asking this, brandon.adams at DawgNation.com. If you send it there, I'll get it. So y'all hit me up there, brandon.adams at DawgNation.com. Devin Snowden says, I have a question about why we, I believe, are second to the last in the SEC in sacks. I know he plays so far off the wideouts, the quarterback gets it out, but why not press more? Yeah, I mean, I am of a belief that Georgia just needs to have a more effective pass rush. Connor wrote a good story about that at DawgNation.com today. And the very best Georgia defense in 2021 had about 50 sacks. 49, I think, was the actual total. That, to me, is not a coincidence. That obviously you've got to be gap sound and you've got to avoid giving up the explosives. In other words, you can sort of juice up your sack total by being super aggressive and then sacrificing a lot of explosive plays on the back end. Georgia doesn't want to do that, but within the fundamentals of kind of sound defense, still got to try to find a way to have a more effective pass rush. And I do believe that Georgia needs more of that. And it could be that in future years, to go back to a topic I've addressed a lot, the idea of the kind of premium positions, it could be that Georgia just has to pay big for the kind of guy. Think about like Dylan Stewart at South Carolina, someone who's just capable of generating that in kind of a sort of a superstar role. You know, Georgia's had kind of a complementary defense where guys played similar roles and had similar value. You may need to go out and find your superstar. And hopefully before the year's done, a guy like Mikael Williams can, when he's healthy, of course, can play like that superstar again. Really good question, though. All right, let's get ready to wrap it up for today. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. You can find all of that from RS Andrews, and it's, you know, it's cool, right? Down in the 40s this morning. That means your heat's going to kick on at some point in time here if it hasn't already. And when it does, you want to make sure yours is ready to go for the very, very cold winter that will eventually be here and the coolish weather we're about to move into. So find out more about how you can get your heating system tuned back up to factory fresh specs online at rsandrews.com. Okay, have a great day. Back tomorrow, DawgNation Daily presented by ServPro. Send me your horns down picks. We'll get you on here as part of our golden shoe. We're going to change the vibe, getting ready to go into Austin on Saturday. Have a great day, everybody. We'll talk to you then.